Hello, it's Dr. Reckinger again, and I'm here to do another example of developing logic and writing out an algorithm. So this one is to practice using while loops, and the problem statement is right here on the screen. What we're going to do in this program is create a number guessing game. So you're going to have the computer pick a number randomly from between 0 and 1, an integer, and you're going to have the computer ask you what number it is thinking, and once you've guessed the number, the computer is going to give you hints to go higher or lower, and then continue to do that until you guess the correct number. And the program will count how many times it takes you to guess the correct number. So this is quite a bit different than the first example that I gave you with the grade sorter. This one is a little more open-ended, I guess, in some. It's a little bit less straightforward. And so both of them are good to practice. So I'm going to go through and write out the steps that you would take if you were doing this with a human, and then we'll convert those steps into computer steps. Okay, so the best way to think about this kind of a problem is to play the game with a person. So have the person think of a number between 0 and 1, or 0 and 100, and ask you to guess the number. So let's think about this as a person. So the first step is to computer randomly selects number from 1 to 100, or 0 to 100. So think of having a friend that's just randomly picking a number. Well, it's not random, but picking a number from 0 to 1. Okay, so then the game is that the computer is going to ask you to guess the number that it's thinking of. So computer asks for a guess from the other player. The computer's thinking of a number. It asks the user to guess that number, and then the next step is that the user guesses a number between 0 and 100. Based off of that response from the player, the computer will give hints. So based on user's response, computer will say whether the number is higher or lower than the guess. And basically, the steps 2, 3, and 4 will be repeated until the user gets the number correct. So repeat 2, 3, and 4 until player guesses correctly. And then the last step is to count each guess. Okay, so that is working through most of the description of the problem statement, I think. So we have 6 steps here. So these are human steps. So now what we're going to do is convert these into computer steps. All right, so the first thing that we're having the computer program do is randomly select a number from 0 to 1, having the computer do that. So we want to define the number using the rand function. So that was something that you guys used in one of your earlier worksheets, is the function rand. The function rand just spits out a random number, and it actually does an integer, or sorry, it actually does a number between 0 and 1, and so we'll have to adjust that a little bit. The next step is for the computer to ask for a guess. So you guys did this a lot in your first couple of programming assignments. So we're going to prompt the user for a guess. So that will be using the input function. Okay, the next step is for the user to respond to the prompt. So this doesn't involve any additional programming. Just save input prompt to a variable. And then the based on the user's response, the computer will need to say whether it is higher or lower. So this means that there's going to be two different scenarios. One is where the number was higher, one is where it was lower, and then there would also be another scenario possibly of them getting the answer correct. So anytime you have these conditions, you're going to use relational operators in an if statement. Okay, so we know we're going to have some sort of if statement in this program that will distinguish between the guess and the actual numbers relationship. And then 2, 3, and 4 will be repeated until the player guesses correctly. So this is a repeat loop. However, we don't actually know how many times to repeat the loop. It depends on the guesses. So this is the perfect situation to use a while loop, and the condition will be that that you want to continue running the while loop until those two numbers are the same, the number that's being guessed and the number that the computer initially defined. So we will work on that condition when we write out the code. And then the last step is just a counter, and we did that in the last programming assignment. But within the while loop, we'll just add a counter that advances with each guess. All right, so we're going to go over to our script file here and start writing out this code. Alright, so let's start with step 1, which was for the computer to randomly select a number. So I'm going to move over into the command window to try out a few things before I do this. So one thing you can do is use the rand function and multiply it by 100. And if you do that, you should always get a number between 0 and 1. But you'll have some decimals associated with that. So you can convert it into an integer, and that will always get you between 0 and 100. So that's one way to do it. But there's actually also another function called rand_i, which gives you just integers, but if I open up the help on rand_i, you have to put in some additional inputs. So rand_i will give you integers, and then you also need to put from how big you want it to be. So if you put in 100, that's the max that you can be. So it says that rand_i, if the first input is imax, which is just the biggest number that it will be. I'm not sure that it ever gets you a 0. Not sure, but we won't worry about that. So we can either use rand_i 100, or we can just do this little int 8 of rand times 100, but there's other ways to do it too. So I'm going to call the actual number, and then I'm going to put in what I just typed in the command window, rand_i of 100. So that's going to randomly select that number. I'm going to unsuppress it and run my code to make sure it's working, and you can see that it's randomly selected a number every time I run the code, so it's a different number every time. So we have that first step done, so that's working. Now we want to create a prompt to ask the user for an input. So we're going to use the input function and say, I'm going to say, I am thinking of a number, please guess, between 0 and 100. So that's the first step here, and if I run that without suppressing it, it allows me to put in a number, and it prints it out as well because I unsuppressed it. So that appears to be working. Remember, you don't have to use the second input of an s, that's only for a string. So step 3 was user responds to the prompt, just save the input to a variable. So in addition to prompting, I also want to save the guess. So I'm going to call it the guess, and I'm going to save that to that variable. Alright, so now it's all suppressed. The next step is, based on the user's response, computer will say whether the number is higher or lower. Okay, so here's where I want to have an if statement. So I want to have two conditions. The first condition is if number is greater than guess. So if the number the computer is thinking of is greater than guess, then I want to create another prompt that says too high, no, too low, guess higher. And then if number is less than guess, then I'm going to create another prompt that says too high, guess lower. And then the last condition is if number equals guess, then there's no need to ask the user to put in another guess. So I'm just going to create a display command that says, good job, you got it. And I'm going to end that if statement. So right now I'm just having it prompt, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the guess in both situations because I just need a new one. And I'm going to see how this works with just giving basically 2 guesses. Okay, so I'm going to run it. It says I'm thinking of a number. And before I do this, actually, I'm going to see what the guess is so that I can check it a little bit easier. So I'm going to Control-C to get out of this. All right, so the random number is 76. So I'm going to guess something too low. I'm going to guess 6. So it said too low, guess higher. I guess 8. And that's the end because I only had to do it once. Let's try it if it's the opposite. So in this case, the number is 75. So I'm going to guess too high, 90. It says too high, guess lower. So that's working. And then the last condition that I want to test is when I get it right. So the answer is 40, so I'm going to guess it. Put 40 in, it said, good job, you got it. So that's working now with one guess. And the conditions are working out okay. So it looks like I have 1 through 4 steps done. And now I decided that if I want to keep guessing, I need to repeat steps 2 through 3 and 4 until the player guesses correctly. So I guess the way that I wrote this, I don't need to re-prompt the user for a guess because I'm doing that in step 4. So that's already kind of all involved in here. So all I need to do is put this if statement in the while loop. So I'm going to nest the while loop around the if statement. And the condition that I want to put is a while loop works by it runs as long as the condition is met. So you want it to keep running until the condition is no longer met, which is a little confusing of a logic. So as long as the number does not equal the guess, I want to keep repeating. Once this is no longer true, it will stop the loop. And that's the trickiest part about a while loop. A while loop runs while the condition is met. So you would only need to keep asking for a guess if this is no longer true. So let's try it. Okay, so the guess is 66, or the number is 66. So I'm going to start by guessing 50. So it says it's too low, so I need to guess higher, so I'll guess 55. Still too low, so I'll guess higher, so I'll do 70. As you can see, I went above it. So now I'll guess 66, and it didn't say good job, you got it. So let's look at why. So when I guessed 70, I was in this loop here, and that was when it was too high, so it asked me to prompt again. When I prompted it again, I guessed 70, and you can see that when I guessed again, I guessed 66. So now 66 does equal 66. So this is no longer true, so it doesn't go into this loop. So never when it's inside this loop will this ever be true. You'll never have it if you've guessed it correctly, it won't be in here. So what we want to do is move this display outside of the while loop, because once it exits the while loop, that means that that condition was true. You can create an if statement around it just to be double sure that you only want it to do it when they are the same. But this isn't really necessary since you know that if this isn't true, that this is true. But we can do it anyway. So let's try it again. So now the number is 18, so I'm going to guess a number 20. that's too high, so it says to guess lower. So I'll guess 15, that's too low, so I'll guess higher. I'll guess it this time, so I'm going to put in 18, and now it says good job, you got it. Okay, so that appears to be working. The last step is to add a counter that advances with each guess so that we can keep track of how many guesses it takes. So before you start the while loop, you're just going to create a count variable that's going to equal 0. And then every time it goes into the count, or anytime it goes into the while loop, it's going to advance the count. One little tip is if you highlight everything and right click and do Smart Indent, it will fix all your tabs for you. Again, I just did Control A or Command A, right click, and then I went on Smart Indent. Alright, so that will keep track of how many times, and you could add a little bit more to your display command. To incorporate that, you could say it only took the number of times. So I just added a little num to string of the count to report how many it took. So let's run this, but this time I'm going to suppress the number so I don't actually know what it is and see if the game works. Alright, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So I'm going to start guessing. This one's going to be harder because I don't know what it is. So I guess 7, too high, guess too low, guess higher. 50, too low, guess higher. Too high, guess lower. Too low, guess higher. Too low, guess higher. Too low, guess higher. 72. Too high, guess lower. Alright, so it was 71 and it only took 8 times. So another thing that you could add to this final display is what the number was, because it never really says that. So I could add and the number was, and then put num to string of number. Alright, let's try it one last time. Oops, too low, guess higher. Alright, so good job, you got it. It only took 8 times and the number was 4. Alright, so that is an example of a writing a code with a while loop. So there's no other way to write this other than using a while loop because you don't know how many times you need to iterate. There's lots of things you can do with this kind of code. You can actually write another code that calls this code. You can always get the guess in a certain number of guesses if you're going from 0 to 100. And I think it's a nice example of developing some logic with a fairly straightforward explanation of what you're trying to do. So I hope this was helpful. Thanks.